Hello, dear audiences, and welcome to the conference of Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, Genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK. First of all, I feel it's necessary to explain those who are not familiar with the Terrorspring Institute. The Terrorspring Institute has held a series of meetings and conferences in various dimensions of understanding and actions of the Mujahedin-e Khalq with the aim of revealing the terrorist activities of this group. It has prepared bulletins to make people more familiar with the various issues and aspects of the MEK terrorists, and has made them available to the public on the Institute's website at terrorspring.com in Persian and English, French, and soon in Albanian. The Institute has also prepared a series of articles by academic elites and journalists familiar with the MEK and published them in various news agencies. These articles are also available to the public on the Terrorspring website. Okay, let's get focused on some history of the Mujahedin-e Khalq. The People's Mujahideen Organization, a terror group with several names like MEK, MKO, PMY, NLA, and NCRI, was established in 1961. Their primary goal was described as fighting against global imperialism, especially fighting the United States, fighting against the colonialists and the Eastern and Western blocs, and their approach was armed struggle. After the victory of the Islamic Revolution, the leaders of the MEK, by nurturing their thirst for power and monopolization to achieve absolute power in ruling Iran, faced the want of people which clearly rejected them. With their process of brainwashing and changing the ideology from Islamic extremism to Marxism, they made their members obey their orders without question, and they carried out ruthless assassinations which are known among themselves as engineering operations. These brutal assassinations targeted and killed more than 13,000 Iranian citizens, including the President and Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Ali and Mohammad Bahonar, head of judiciary Ayatollah Beheshti, a number of MPs, ministers, and religious scholars. After failing to gain power and losing their social base in Iran, and in the invasion of the Iraqi Ba'ath regime to Iran, they sought refuge with Saddam, betrayed their own people and country by serving the enemy. The Mujahideen had attacked their own country in Operation Furugh Javidan, meaning the eternal light, and massacred a large number of ordinary people. They then faced the counterattack of Iran's armed forces in Operation Mersad and fled to Iraq with many casualties. After the Furugh Javidan operation and in the First Persian Gulf War, and in order to weaken Saddam's Ba'ath regime, Iraqi Kurds, who were chemically bombed by Saddam's army in Halabja and Khormal 3 years before, seized the opportunity to advance and avenge the bloodshed. They took over the Kurdish region themselves. The Kurds were able to take control of the cities of Mosul and Soleimania, and then advance towards cities such as Tus, Kafri, and Jalula. It was enough for the Kurds to cross Suleiman Bay Highway and reach the main road and advance towards Baghdad. A week after the Kurdish forces took control of the northern cities of Iraq, the Mujahideen forces entered Kirkuk wearing Kurdish clothing and posters of Masoud Barzani and Jalal Talabani. At this stage, the so-called liberation of the army of the Mujahideen carried out Morvarid 1 and 2 operations and suppressed the people, and the Peshmerga prevented them from advancing in various cities. The Mujahideen surprised the Kurdish militias and Peshmerga of Kirkuk and caused the Ba'athist government to regain control of the city of Kirkuk, during which, according to Iraqi Kurdish forces, hundreds of Kurdish residents of Kirkuk were massacred by the members of the Mujahideen. It is estimated that more than 4,000 Kurds lost their lives at the hands of the Mujahideen in Morvarid 1 and 2 operations. Okay, in this section we introduce the speakers of the first day of the Conference of Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, Genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK. The speakers of this part of the conference are Dr. Alireza Abedini, head of the Yassin think tank from Iran, Dr. Ibrahim al-Seraj, head of the Association for the Defense of Journalists' Rights from Iraq, Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini, a university professor and representative of Unidolomiti University from Italy, Mrs. Maria Morigi, author, archaeologist, journalist, and religious researcher from Italy, and Mr. Mohammad Pouladvand, and international relations expert from Terrorspring Institute from Iran, that we are honored to have them in this event with us. Okay, the first speaker today is Dr. Alireza Abedini, the head of Yassin think tank, and we invite you to pay attention to his speech. Thank you.
برای بررسی جنایات منافقین لازمه که ابتدای ایدئولوژی منافقین رو بررسی کنیم. منافقی با اعتقاد به توجیه شدن وسیله توسط هدف، اقدام به هر جنایتی به بهانه هدف واهی حکومت رجوی بر ایران رو جایز میدونن. از بمبگذاری و ترور مسئولان پاک و خدوم نظام همانند شهیدان رجایی و باهنر با عنوان زدن سرانگشتان نظام تا ترورهای کور و کشتن شهروندان بیگناه ایرانی با فتوای پاسدارکشی و حزب الله کشی که توسط سران منافقین داده شده بود، با عنوان عملیات‌های واحدهای موتوری تماماً برای دستیابی منافقین به منابع ملی و حکومت ایران بود. پس از حضور منافقین در عراق و عضویت سران منافقین به طور اعم و مسعود رجوی به طور اخص در حزب بعث عراق، علاوه بر جنایاتی که در ایران مرتکب شدند، به دستور صدام در جنایات صدام علیه ملت عراق، علل خصوص ملت کرد نیز شرکت کردند و عملاً به ارتش خصوصی صدام تبدیل شده بودند. به عنوان مثال میتوان از عملیات مروارید نام برد که به دستور مستقیم صدام علیه کردهای مخالف صدام انجام پذیرفت. این عملیات در امتداد و مشابه عملیات انفال بود که صدام در اون عملیات نسل کشی کردها رو به راه انداخت و بنا به گزارشی حدود 200,000 کرد رو در آن عملیات قتل عام کرد. در نشست پیش از عملیات مروارید، رجوی به تروریست‌های تحت امرش گفته بود که پاسدارها همه در لباس کردی دارن با ما می‌جنگند و اینهایی که می‌کشید کرد نیستند بلکه پاسدار هستند که روی لباس پاسداریشون لباس کردی پوشیدند. همین باعث شد که تروریست‌های رجوی با انواع سلاح‌های گرم به شهروندان عادی از کودک و زن تا افراد مسلح حمله کنند و آنها را قتل عام کنند و بعد از اتمام این قتل عام 4 نفر جوان زیر 20 سال رو در تلویزیون عراق نشوندند تا بگن که اینهایی که کشتن همه کرد نبودن بلکه بخششون هم پاسدار بودند. میزان قساوت و وحشیگری منافقین در عملیات مروارید به اندازه‌ای بود که عزت ابراهیم الدوری معاون صدام در اولین نشست حزب بعث بعد از عملیات مروارید که رجوی هم در اون حضور داشته به عنوان اولین نفر به رجوی تبریک گفته و تمامی حاضران به مدت چند دقیقه برای رجوی کف زدند. همچنین در دیدار صدام از استان دیالی بعد از عملیات مروارید، استاندار دیالی در برابر دوربین خبرنگاران به صدام گفت که کشور عراق و استان دیالی مدیون خدمات تروریست‌های رجوی است. جنایات فرقه منافقین در عراق اما به اینجا ختم نمیشه. با آغاز جنگ مسلحانه عوامل صهیونیسم در سوریه که با عنوان بهار عربی یا به قول خودمون بیداری اسلامی توسط یهود تبلیغ شد، اما در حقیقت برای بستن راه‌های مواصلاتی ایران بود، فردی به نام احمد الجوبا به عنوان رئیس شاخه سیاسی نیروهای مسلح مخالف بشار اسد در پاریس با مریم رجوی ملاقات میکنه و بعد از اون داعش از جبهة النصره انشعاب پیدا میکنه، از مخالفان بشار اسد، مخالفان مسلح بشار اسد انشعاب پیدا میکنه و به سمت عراق حرکت میکنه. منافقین در اینجا در دو مرحله انجام وظیفه کردن برای داعش. چون اینو وظیفه خودشون میدونستن. در هر منافقین اصولا در هر جنایتی که باشه، جنایت رو وظیفه خودشون میدونن، قتل و کشتار رو وظیفه خودشون میدونن. منافقین ابتدا اومدن به عنوان نیروی هماهنگ کننده عزت ابراهیم الدوری معاون صدام رو در کنار ابوبکر البغدادی گذاشتند و او رو به عنوان یکی از نیروها و یا بهتر بگم از فرماندهان ارشد ابوبکر البغدادی در جنایات داعش در عراق سهیم کردند و سپس با هماهنگی منافقین و عزت ابراهیم الدوری کلیه بازماندگان حزب بعث عراق در نظام سیاسی عراق پس از صدام که در دولت‌ها و در منصب‌ها هنوز بودند، اینها پست‌های خودشون رو خالی کردند و جای خودشون رو به داعش دادند. به همین دلیل بود که داعش با کمترین مقاومت تونست که تا نزدیکی‌های مرز ایران پیشروی کنه. بعد از اینکه اینا همکاریشون رو با داعش از این طریق آغاز کردند و بعد از روشن شدن اینکه نیروهای داعش از سواد سیاسی و نظامی کافی برخوردار نیستند، منافقین اومدن و نقش مستشاری رو به عهده گرفتن و به عنوان مستشار نظامی داعش با داعش همکاری میکردن و در کنار اون به عنوان نیروی فارسی زبان بیسیم‌های نیروهای مدافع حرم رو شنود می‌کردند و جاسوسی می‌کردند برای داعش و به نفع داعش. در حقیقت منافقین در تمامی جنایاتی که داعش در عراق ترتیب داد و مرتکب شد سهیم بودند و مشارکت داشتند و دست منافقین به خون مردم عراق، مخصوصاً کردها و علاوه خصوص کردهای ایزدی آغشته است. بعد به تحقیق میتونم بگم که عامل پشت پرده سقوط موصل و تکریت و قتل عام کردها و تخریب شهر توسط داعش فرقه تروریستی رجوی بود. چرا که این فرقه تروریستی رجوی بود که عزت ابراهیم الدوری رو که یکی از قسی القلب ترین افراد حزب بعث عراق بود رو در کنار ابوبکر البغدادی نشوند برای تخریب عراق و برای انتقام از نیروهای مردمی عراق، تنها به دلیل اینکه صدام سقوط کرده بود. داعش تونست با هماهنگی و با کمک منافقین شهرها را یکی پس از دیگری به تصرف کنه و جنایاتی رو مرتکب بشه که تاریخ تا کنون به خودش ندیده. یکی از اون جنایات اسپایکر بود. بنده یک سوالی اینجا مطرح میکنم که روی سخنم مسئولان و مدیران اقلیم کردستانه. با وجود اینکه احزاب کرد در کردستان عراق، در اقلیم کردستان، از عملیات مروارید، از همراهی منافقین با صدام و از نسل‌کشی و قتل عام کردها توسط منافقین اطلاع دارند و همینطور از همکاری منافقین با داعش در مراحل مختلف اطلاع دارند و همینطور از حضور ابراهیم الدوری در کنار نیروهای داعش با هماهنگی و همکاری منافقین اطلاع دارند، چطوره که یکی از اعضای حزب منحله دموکرات کردستان، یا بهتر بگم سخنگوی حزب منحله دموکرات کردستان، میاد و از ائتلاف با منافقین صحبت میکنه و میگه هیچ خط قرمزی بین منافقین و این حزب منحله وجود نداره و بر سر تجزیه ایران تحت عنوان خودمختاری هم با منافقین به توافق رسیده. مگر نه اینکه منافقین در دستشون تا مفرق به خون قوم کرد آغشته است. آیا این ائتلاف حزب منحله دموکرات کردستان با منافقین به معنای تأیید و حمایت این حزب منحله از جنایاتی که منافقین در عراق علیه قوم کرد کردن نیست؟ اینکه چرا گردانندگان اقلیم کردستان، چرا آقایان بارزانی ها و احزاب کرد عراقی در برابر خیانت افرادی امثال خالد عزیزی و یا مصطفی هجری و یا گروهک کرد خبات که توسط خود منافقین ساخته شده و در عراق در بخش اقلیم فعال هستش سکوت کردن و چشمشون رو روی جنایات منافقین علیه قوم کرد بستن. این جای سوال و تعجب داره. از طرفی این بر ما پوشیده نیستش که افرادی نظیر خالد عزیزی یا عبدالرحمن قاسملو یا شرفکندی معدوم با منافقین و با رجوی ارتباط خوبی داشتند، اما این دلیل نمیشه که اینها چشمشون رو بر جنایات رجوی در کردستان ببندند و با آنها سر سرزمین‌های خیالی و توهمی کردستان مستقل همکاری‌های تنگاتنگ داشته باشند و به توافق برسند. سوال اینجاست، این خیانت حزب منحله دموکرات کردستان در همکاریش با منافقین رو اقلیم و سایر احزاب کرد چگونه میتونن تحمل بکنن و چگونه باش برخورد میکنن؟ و نکته دیگه‌ای که وجود داره اینه که منافقین در هر درگیری، در هر جایی که بوی خون و جنایت بده حضور دارند و برای این فرقه جنایت و جاسوسی فرقی نمیکنه که قربانی کیست. یک روز به اعتراف علی زرکش معدوم در عملیات مرصاد تحت تحلیل پاسدارکشی و حزب اللهی کشی، منافقین در حد فاصله 30 خرداد سال 61 تا 30 خرداد سال 62 2800 نفر رو در خیابان‌های ایران کشتند که از این تعداد فقط 40 نفر پاسدار بودند. یعنی 2760 نفر فقط طی یک سال بیگناه توسط منافقین به شهادت رسیدند. از طرف دیگه منافقین در همکاری و به دستور صدام در عملیات مروارید شروع میکنند به کردکشی تحت عنوان با ایدئولوژی پاسدارکشی و حزب اللهی کشی میان و با کردهای عراق دست به جنایت میزنند، بر علیه کردهای عراق دست به جنایت میزنند. و در جای دیگه دوباره منافقین میان و در توسط و با هماهنگی حزب بعث عراق و با همکاری داعش دست به جنایاتی میزنند در عراق که بر همگان به هیچ کس پوشیده نیست. و اینکه چرا حزب کردستان، چرا دولت خودمختار کردستان عراق با این احزاب خائن به قوم کرد برخورد نمیکنه و چرا منافقین در میان کردها نفوذ کردند و کردها رو با علم به این که کردها میدونن که منافقین قاتلانشون هستند با اونها توافق کردند. این سوالی است که اقلیم کردستان باید بهش پاسخ بده. منافقین هر روز بودنشون خیانت علیه بشریته و نفس کشیدنشون جنایت علیه بشریته. چرا نیروهای کرد علیه اینها موضع نمیگیرند و چرا اقلیم کردستان پاسخ قاطعی به کردکشی منافقین در عملیات مروارید بهشون نمیده؟ این سوالی است که آقایان بارزانی و سایر احزاب کرد در کردستان عراق باید بهش پاسخ بدن. و سلام.
Yes, we thank for the valuable speech of Dr. Alireza Abedini, the head of Yassin think tank, who pointed out good and valuable points in his speech. The second speaker today is Dr. Ibrahim al-Seraj, the head of the Association for the Defense of Journalists' Rights from Iraq, and we invite you to pay attention to his speech. Thank you so much.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يعني بالتأكيد أن منظمة خلق ارتكبت ما ارتكبت من الجرائم بحق الإنسانية سواء في العراق أو في إقليم كردستان، وكانت هذه الجريمة، هذه المنظمة هي منظمة إرهابية بامتياز، وسخرها نظام صدام المجرم لارتكاب هذا المجازر بحق العراقيين سواء في محافظات العراقية الجنوبية والوسطى أو حتى في إقليم كردستان، وكانت تقوم بمجازر ضد البشرية وانتهاكات خطيرة. وللأسف الشديد أن هناك تباطؤ من قبل المجتمع الدولي في تصنيف هذه المنظمة كمنظمة إرهابية، وأيضا حتى ملاحقتها يجب أن تلاحق هذه المنظمة وكل عناصرها لما تورطوا به من جرائم. يجب أن تكون هناك ملاحقة قضائية دولية. الجرائم ارتكبتها هي الجرائم ضد الإنسانية وجرائم حرب بحق المدنيين العزل، سواء من النساء والأطفال والشيوخ. هذه المنظمة منظمة إرهابية. ما فعلته في إقليم كردستان جرائم يندى لها جميع البشرية، وللأسف الشديد لم تكن هناك أي إطالة أو تحقيق في تلك الجرائم، وكان هناك تعمد من قبل المنظمات الدولية ومن قبل الجهات المختصة والمنظمات الحقوقية الدولية ومنظمات حقوق الإنسان، وحتى من قبل مجلس حقوق الإنسان الدولي في جنيف. كان يفترض أن تكون هناك ملاحقة وأن تكون هناك متابعة لهذا الجرائم وفتح ملف في التحقيق في الجرائم التي ارتكبتها عناصر منظمة خلق الإرهابية الإجرامية، التي كانت أحد الأدوات النظام صدام المجرم في تنفيذ جرائمه ضد الشعب العراقي الأعزل، ضد المدنيين، ضد الأبرياء، ضد العزل. هذه منظمة يجب أن تصنف منظمة إرهابية. هذا يعني هذه مطالب إلى المجتمع الدولي. 2، يجب أن تكون هناك ملاحقة قضائية لكل عناصرها اللي تورطوا فيها في ارتكاب تلك الجرائم وتنفيذ تلك الجرائم، التي هذه الجرائم نفذت بأوامر من نظام صدام المجرم. وهذا الآن الشهود موجودين، والجرائم لا زالت، الضحايا لا زالوا موجودين أحياء، سواء من المدنيين الذين يمتلكون شهادات حول ما ارتكبته هذه المنظمة المتطرفة المجرمة. العتب على الاتحاد الأوروبي الذي منح إقامة لهؤلاء المجرمين وهؤلاء العناصر. هؤلاء لا يقلون ضررا من داعش، هؤلاء أسوأ من داعش. لذلك يفترض أن تكون هناك ملاحقة من قبل الجهات المختصة والجهات الرسمية وتقديمهم إلى القضاء وتقديم.
We would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Ibrahim al-Seraj, the head of the Association for the Defense of Journalists' Rights from Iraq, who gave a valuable speech on behalf of the people of Iraq, which is one of the countries that has hit hard from the terrorist group of MEK. The next person we have today at the Genocide of Crimes Against Humanity, Genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK conference is Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini, a university professor and also a representative of the Unidolomiti University from Italy, and I invite you to pay attention to his valuable speech. Thank you.
At first, I would like to give thanks for this invitation. I'm Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini from Italy, from the University Unidolomiti of Belluno, and Lorenzo de Medici of Florence. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this conference. I would like to talk about the Italian hypocrisy in the face of MEK terrorism. Because actually in Italy we still don't have an official position taken by our government, but we have some interviews and documents that were spread on the mass media of mainstream and that were used in the diplomacy within all the countries of the Atlantic Treaty and with Iran. There are many double standards that are commonly adopted and implemented around the world, such as the actions that take place under the issue of global terrorism, and in many cases these policies are simply ignored or dismissed by the international community and by the mass medias. So, in general, the behavior of all the Western countries when faced with two identical events occurring in two different places or countries is completely different and sometimes contradictory. As we know, in Italy we had many events in the past about terrorism, especially connected to Islamic terrorism. And at the beginning of this century, we had something like 15 years spent by the political communication using the Islamic religion as pretext for justifying some actions. In this, it's very important for us to focus, which is the meaning of this silence of the Italian government, but also the meaning of what has been communicated in over, not official, channels. So, the Mujahedin terrorist group murdered 6 American advisors in the 1970s and proudly published news of the murders in a magazine affiliated with its group. And what is very interesting for me is that although the United States listed the group as a terrorist organization, it also removed it from the list without warning and even provided this terrorist group with financial, political, and intelligence assistance. We already know how the United States and all the great Satan with UK, Israel, and Saudi Arabia works very well with intelligence to organize colored revolutions. So I will not touch this topic because it's already clear for all of us. But it's also clear example of this double standard with regard to international terrorism. Because in another example, the MEK terrorist group killed thousands and thousands of Iranians, also 6 Americans and thousands of Iraqi Kurds, and has repeatedly tortured and executed its members, but on one astonishing occasion held a meeting in the Italian Senate, with some of the country's political officials accusing Iran of violating human rights laws. I must say that this terrorist group does not even allow its members to marry. No one in this group has the right to think about sex, and if someone does think about it, they have to inform their superiors, only to be ridiculed, humiliated, and finally insulted during a meeting. So we can see really how it's different, the consideration of human rights. According to the many European and American scholars, this group is a terrorist sect. And in this regards, we should ask to ourselves, how can such a group talk about human rights when it violates all the human rights laws concerning its members? And here it's interesting to see also how the Italian government received the presence of Mujahedin members of the MEK in the Italian Senate. The MEK, we know, held an anti-Iranian meeting in the Italian Senate in the past under the pretext of human rights violation in Iran, despite the fact that this terrorist group was on the list of American and European terrorist group until 2012 and shed the blood of thousands of Iranians, Americans, Iraqi Kurds. And how it's possible that Italian authorities are willing to attend a meeting of such a terrorist group? On the one hand, we should not be surprised by European and Western double standards towards terrorism and terrorists. We witnessed their bias in the Syrian crisis when Western media's politicians and activists supported the so-called moderate rebels against the legitimate government of Bashar al-Assad. And something similar happened with the terrorists of ISIS, of the Islamic State. And we also must remember how the West supported Saddam Hussein's crimes against Iraq in the imposed war. But also what is happening in the last months, with the mass medias of Western, especially in Italy, talking a lot against Iran because of the protest, so-called protest, because of Chador, because of Veil, etc. On the other hand, unfortunately, some Italian politicians and authorities are deeply influenced, as we know, by American and Zionist propaganda against Iran, and know nothing about Iran other than what comes from those sources. This is a big problem in Italy because we have a great ignorance about what is really Iran and what is really happening with the terrorist groups at the borders. So how do we justify the contradictory view of the supporters of this terrorist group of human rights? While the group's fans support them on the grounds of human rights violations in Iran, there are many cases of human rights violations in their past and present. And these criminal acts cannot be denied. It cannot really be justified. Some of them, as I said, are really ignorant of the real facts. and know nothing about the history of the MEK, and their ideology and overs are in bad faith and in the service of Western propaganda. This is why I think that it's very important to make people aware of the history of the MEK and its crimes. Italian politicians, but generally Western politicians, will probably keep very biased view because they serve this kind of political propaganda, American propaganda, but we must do our best to make people aware of the truth. The MEK terrorist group is known around the world for spreading false news and propaganda against Iran, and the United States has repeatedly acknowledged that these informations and news is false in its reports, such as news about the production of atomic bombs. That news was repeatedly sent by the MEK to the International Atomic Energy Agency. But after inspectors visited the area, they found that there was nothing there. We very know this event. Even on human rights issues, the group is spreading lies by creating troll farms that can mislead political officials and disguise their activities with this trick. So we have to ask: do you think that with this black record and history, this terrorist group is a reliable entity for political authorities that organize a meeting against Iran because of their cases? This terrorist group, I think, is not a reliable entity, but I think those responsible for propaganda in the Western media are not for reliable source. When they spread fake news about, for example, the Syrian government, they use the fake reports of the terrorist groups like al-Nusra. From the point of view of the Western media, everything that introduced the axis of resistance, the countries, so we know Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, etc., and the groups, Pasdaran, Hezbollah, Al-Nasrullah, etc., linked to it in a negative way is good, even if it is false. They do not seek the truth. Of course, they seek their own interest. They want people to think that the axis of resistance is an evil entity and that the United States, the European Union, and their allies are fighting against this enemy. While we know that the axis of resistance and the countries and groups connected to it are trying to preserve their nation, their people, their culture, and their resources from globalists and arrogant forces and hegemony. The Italian government recently, by the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and by the Foreign Minister Tajani, spent bad words against Iran, but when some journalists, I will not quote the journal, asked them what about the Mujahedin terrorist groups that are since many years and years killing people on the borders with Iran and also in Iraq, what is happening? Because Iraq has a great presence of Americans, and we are allied to Americans as Italians, as we know. And the government answered, it was really crazy by the words of the minister and the speaker of the minister, that was not a problem of Italians, but a problem of the Middle East, and that we would like, as Italians, follow the instructions of the American government. So it's very clear how these double standards works in Italy. The United States wants the axis of resistance and its related countries and groups to be weakened. They see them as their enemies because they prevent the Americans and their allies from achieving their interests in the region. They want to keep the control. They want to keep a control that is made not only of military control, but especially by the hybrid war system using the mass media and propaganda. In these days, we are living here in Italy a great hate speech against the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it's incredible to see how many of the mainstream information channels are spreading a great confusion, talking about terrorism of Iranians against the local neighbors of the region. So talking about Pakistan, talking about other countries, Iraq, of course, when it's completely the opposite. But the ignorance of people makes them to believe it. So I would not be surprised if were the case would be repeated, because these double standards are a big problem, and it's something that we are not still able to control, and that we are not keeping care. It's interesting how also Italian intelligence is working on this, because as we know, we are very involved in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict actually, and our government has spoken many times about the implication of this for Italians. But when we are talking about Middle East, usually in the past we had many various options and point of views. In the last months we only have one, and it's really interesting how they are spreading these informations, making confusion between the different parts of Islam, so difference between Shiites and Sunnis and Wahhabites, etc., and how they are mixing it. We are listening, talking in some journals and also blogs online, blogs that usually are led by intelligence groups, that Shiites are the same things of Wahhabites, and that we are leading with ideologies the terrorist group. So this is making, in my opinion, and I go to conclusion, a great problem, will be a great problem about the kind of answers that the Italian government will one day give officially about the MEK terrorism and the situation with all the Middle East. Sadly, we already had the declaration of terrorism for some of the organizations, members of the Axis of Resistance. And in the last days, the last weeks, we had many bad words spent by politicians against Iranian friends, our Iranian friends. I think that these double standards are the natural and physiological consequence of 70 years of hegemony and control by the Americans, and this will maybe means also another change about the position in front of the terrorism. We are passing, like, in my opinion, from condemning a kind of terrorism because it's terrorism, as general terrorism, so like a form of political and military action, to accepting another form of terrorism that is useful for the intentions and for the objective to realize. And this is totally in the center of the hybrid war, where in the first phase of an hybrid war, when we plan a joint warfare, we use and we consider the use of a terrorism. Also, if it is an artificial terrorism created by intelligence and governments, or if it's a natural one truly made by people. So maybe the Italian government will arrive, and I conclude, to accept this kind of terrorism, or with an official declaration, or with a silence, because we have to remember that a silence maybe is more powerful than telling some words. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I wish you to have a great conference.
Okay, we would like to thank Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini, University Professor and representative of Unidolomiti University from Italy, who expressed valuable words about the actions of the terrorist group of the MEK. Undoubtedly, one of the countries where the group of MEK seeks to expand its activities is Italy, and we hope that by revealing the terrorist face of the group of MEK, the noble people and politicians of this country will be aware of the danger of MEK and do not allow this group to operate in Italy. In the next speech, we have Mrs. Maria Morigi, a writer, archaeologist, journalist, and religious researcher from Italy, and we invite you to pay attention to her speech. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Maria Morigi from Italy, author, archaeologist, and scholar of the history of religions. Before I start, I would like to thank the Terrorspring Institute for inviting me to the conference of mass killing of the Kurds by the Mujahedin-e Khalq. Iran Mujahedin-e Khalq terrorism. Other organizations configure themselves as resistors or governments in exile. This is the case of the Mujahedin-e Khalq or People's Mujahedin of Iran or National Liberation Army of Iran, which is responsible for the assassination of about 12,000 Iranians in the last 40 years. The organization, founded in the 1960s by a group of radical students who profess Marxism and Islamism, leads the first armed struggle against Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. After the Communist Revolution of 1989, the leader of the MEK, Masoud Rajavi, caused the Islamic Republic of Iran to fight, and in 1981, an attack by the MEK targets the leaders of the state. 70 officers are killed, including President Mohammad Ali Rajai, Prime Minister Mohammad Javad Bahonar, and Chief Justice Hossein Beheshti. The Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is seriously injured and loses the use of his right arm. Subsequently, the MEK leaders took refuge in Paris, where they founded their political umbrella, the National Council of Iranian Resistance, NCRI, and the group, already deployed alongside the Iraqi army during the Iraq-Iran War from 1980 to 1988, fled to Iraq, supporting Saddam Hussein in suppressing the country's Shiite and Kurdish communities. In 1986, when President Mitterrand began a dialogue with Iran to release the French hostages held in Beirut, France expelled Masoud Rajavi. Since the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, the U.S. neocon-backed MEK has been receiving training from the Joint Special Operation Command, JSOC, in the Nevada desert, including communication techniques, cryptography, assault and guerrilla techniques, and so on. In 2012, the testimonies of two Obama administration officials denounced that the assassination of 5 Iranian nuclear scientists in 2007 would have been committed by the MEK in collaboration with the Mossad and the support of the U.S. intelligence. In September 2012, the USA removed the MEK from the list of terrorist organizations, a list in which they had been registered in 1997 by Secretary of State Madeleine Albright as an openness towards the reformist Iranian President Khatami. The removal from the terrorist list is supported by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who sends Congress a confidential communication on the matter, allowing the group to do business and activities under U.S. jurisdiction. Since September 2012, the Mujahideen leave Camp Ashraf in Iraq in Diyala province, training and training center, and are routed to Albania and Europe. With the Trump administration and the appointment of senior officials such as Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, a new attempt to destabilize Iran is being implemented. This strategy envisages the accreditation in Washington of the MEK group as a legitimate opposition to the Islamic Republic of Iran. There are several U.S. political figures who seem won to the cause of the MEK. The former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, during the MEK annual conference in Paris on June 2018, openly invokes regime change in Tehran. John Bolton, National Security Advisor, regularly attends their conventions. Elizabeth Robin of the New York Times in 2003 visits Camp Ashraf and offers a description of the military base and the sectarian characteristics of the group. Robin says she saw an artificial world of worker bees. About half of the Mujahideen are women, all dressed in khaki uniforms and scarlet veils, practicing their weapons, driving the pickups and military vehicles. Since the 1980s, MEK members must take a vow of eternal celibacy. Those who are married must divorce. Those who are not must swear not to do so and cannot have children. Over the years, the organization, although born from a Marxist Islamist ideology, takes on the characteristics of a sect centered on the rule of women, and on the cult of the personality of the leader Maryam Rajavi, wife of Masoud, destined to become head of government after she is overthrown the Islamic Republic of Iran, born out of the 1979 revolution. Girls are taught that joining the sect is a journey to self-empowerment and the enlightenment of martyrdom inspired by the light and wisdom of Maryam Rajavi. Thinking of the Islamic sect of the assassinations is not really a coincidence when we talk about the MEK. Today, the MEKs publicly profess values of secularism and democracy. They exhibit a pro-free market philosophy. They preach women's emancipation. However, they hide a contradictory truth if one considers that the group members cannot obtain information from newspapers, radio, or television, and that no one can criticize the leader. Members are periodically subjected to self-criticism sessions in which they are filmed, admitting to behavior contrary to group laws. The footage can later be used against them. Human rights organizations have extensively documented abuses within the group, and the Iranian population itself does not recognize any legitimacy for them. Indeed, there is a deep hostility towards the MEK for its support to Saddam during Iran-Iraq war. Iraqi and Iranian Kurdistan, Kurdish opposition party groups, MEK terrorism. For the areas of Chinese Xinjiang, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and the ex-Soviet republics of Central Asia, I dealt with fundamentalist groups of Islamic origin and with unrecognized ethnic minorities often persecuted by the political power. So I gladly agree to talk about the issue of Kurdistan and the Mujahedin-e Khalq MEK organization that the Kurds denounce as authors of genocide and betrayal of the Kurdish cause. Iran, Kurdish opposition, and guerrilla groups. Several leftist guerrilla groups attempting to overthrow the regime of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi were active in Iran from 1971 to 1979. The groups shared a commitment to armed struggle and most were Marxist in orientation. Scholar Ervand Abrahamian says such groups were formed because the mass, unarmed communist Tudeh party was under such intense repression that it could not function. The Iranian guerrilla strategy therefore consisted of heroic acts of violent resistance to break the government's terror. The guerrilla groups active in the first half of the 1970s were revived at the end of 1978 by massive demonstrations, the return of opponents from abroad. Fedayeen and Mujahedin became sizable movements made up largely of young people. In Iranian territory, many Kurdish opposition groups have their historical bases, particularly in the northwestern cities such as Saqqez, Urmia, Divandar, Kermanshah, Dehgolan, Ilam, Piranshahr, where the Kurdish minority lives. Several parties have given voice to the Kurdish demands, including the Kumla Party of Iranian Kurdistan, the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran KDPI, founded in 1945, the Kurdistan Democratic Party PDK of Iran, which separated by the KDPI in 2006, fighting for years for Kurdish autonomy within a federal Iran. Their members who have bases in Iraqi Kurdistan are considered terrorists and responsible for the chaos at home, which is why they were hit in recent protests, having made Mahsa Amini's cause their own and angering the Tehran government. This positioning is serving as the reason for the IRGC to attack Kurdish groups in Iraq, accusing them of sending arms and support.
Okay, we would like to thank Mrs. Maria Morigi, writer, archaeologist, journalist, and religious researcher from Italy, who provided us with valuable information with her presentation. In this section, we have Mr. Mohammad Pouladvand, and international relations expert from Terrorspring Institute from Iran, who presents valuable international documents about the terrorist activities of MEK. We invite you to pay attention to his speech. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, hello dear audiences. Thank you for being with us at this conference of genocide and crimes against humanity, the mass killing and the genocide of the Kurds by the Mujahedin-e Khalq. Here I'm going to tell you about the documents and the shreds of evidence that have been released by American institutes and American intelligence services that all testify that the Mujahedin-e Khalq has always been a terrorist group with lots of heinous crimes that has committed against its own members and against the people of the world and humanity. The prominent American RAND Institute has published a documented report condemning the so-called Islamic Marxist Iranian terrorist cult of the Mujahedin-e Khalq, with several names like MEK, MKO, NCRI, PMOI, NLA, and so on, for their heinous crimes against humanity. According to this American Research Institute's report, the Mujahedin-e Khalq lost its social position and popularity due to aiding and abetting Saddam during the 8 years of Iran-Iraq war. In addition, under the pretext of a sophisticated system of brainwashing called ideological revolution, as they themselves put it, the MEK leaders, Masoud and Maryam Rajavi, have abused their members in many ways. And these include several ways, like mandatory divorce and mandatory celibacy, physical abuse, limited exit option. They had no option. They couldn't choose to leave the organization. Well, they themselves call it an organization, while it's more like a cult or a terrorist group. And well, the confiscation of their assets, their sexual control, their emotional control and isolation, after several years of fighting for the Mujahideen, their members were banned from having a family. There was this mandatory divorce. They all got divorced and their children were sent to European countries, and they were totally exploited by this terrorist group of the Mujahedin-e Khalq. Also, in several cases, MEK members' families in Iran were told to have died or have been killed by the Iranian government at that time. And those who were in Camp Ashraf in Iraq or Camp Liberty, or those, some of whom, let's say, are now in Albania in Camp Ashraf 3, they are told that their members, their family members, have been killed, have been massacred by the Iranian government. According to RAND's report and according to the reports of the defected members of the MEK, the members were forced to hold daily sessions or weekly and monthly sessions in which, they would call it self-criticism sessions. They would confess to whatever even they had thought about, and they were banned from even thinking about emotional and sexual issues. The interesting thing is that the MEK was delisted by the US from the FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organizations, while the RAND Institute asserts that the assassination of 6 US military advisors, was committed by this terrorist group. The assassination of those like Colonel Jack Turner, Lewis Hawkins, Colonel Paul Schaefer, and the civilians like Robert R. Krongrad, William C. Cottrell, and Donald G. Smith was done and was carried out by the terrorist group of the Mujahedin-e Khalq. And in terms of cult-like, dictatorial, and despotic behavior that was shown to the members of the Mujahedin-e Khalq by their leaders, we can point out to this part of the document of Rand's report, which says that there was sleep deprivation and there was the use of long hours of work, which is a characteristic of the cults. They had to work, the members had to work up to 16 and even 17 hours a day, each and every day, which made their lives quite frustrating for them. And the report also mentions that even when there was no work to be done, there was this so-called beautification projects. They had to beautify everything that was there in their camps, even the military equipment like tanks. Rand's report continues with several other shocking facts, like the fact that this group smuggled MEK family members out of Iran to visit their relatives at MEK camps in Iraq and then prevented them from departing home. There are examples of brothers and sisters who had been invited to the camp and then they had been kept there for several years, some of whom have not returned home even by now. Additionally, for years, the MEK was listed as a terrorist group because of being called Saddam's private army and due to helping him suppress thousands of Shia and Kurdish Iraqis. And the crimes they committed against the Iraqi Kurds in Morvarid 1 and Morvarid 2 operation led to the mass killing of over 4,000 Iraqi Kurds. They were used, the MEK members and soldiers were used as the helping hand of Saddam and as Saddam's mercenaries and private army there. The Mujahedin-e Khalq is now in want of and in search of having a free Iran back, as they put it, while they themselves have no freedom and no liberty inside the group. And the group members do not have free access to television, to the radio, and within the camp of the Mujahideen, whatever they do is limited to working behind, let's say, computers and being used as a troll farm and troll army and spreading propaganda against Iran and against whatever the Iranian people and the Iranian government advocates for. According to Balkan Insight, Facebook has also closed over 300 accounts belonging to the members of the MEK merely for spreading propaganda against Iran. And it is mentioned that this base or this troll farm was in Albania in a camp which is now called Camp Ashraf 3. Thank you so much.
Okay, we would like to thank Mr. Mohammad Pouladvand, International Relations Expert from Terrorspring Institute from Iran, for providing valuable information and documents each of which has a world of its own and may be unique in its own way. Okay, here on the first day of the genocide and the crimes against humanity, genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK, we honor to have your attention and concerns. We hope that this conference can be an effective step in revealing the terrorist group of MEK to the people of the world, and that the information presented in this conference can be considered as evidence which can be used in international courts against the terrorist group of MEK. I think it is necessary to express my gratitude and appreciation on behalf of the Terrorspring Institute for the speakers and participants in this international conference. In this section, we briefly introduce the second day of the genocide and crimes against humanity, genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK. In the next day, we will have the speech of Mr. Morigi, defector of the terrorist group of the MEK, who is an eyewitness of the killing and genocide of Kurds in Iraq by the MEK. Mr. Daniel Perra, journalist and analyst of geopolitical issues from Italy, and Dr. Fontina, a university professor, writer, and journalist from Canada, who will express their points and will give their opinions on the crimes occurred for the Kurds of Iraq by the terrorist group of the MEK. Okay, dear audiences, once again, we appreciate your presence on the first day of the conference of crimes against humanity, crime and genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK, and we invite you to let us be your host tomorrow on the second day of the conference. Thank you and goodbye.